Cool. All right, Jordan. Well, I'm very happy to talk to you today. Been following your conversations with many people since you kind of got involved in this little corner, and I I've since found out that like sending people an 800-page book like out of the blue is kind of an intense like introduction. So
By the way,
um,
you're not alone in that. It's rare, but
yeah.
it's not a one of one. I've had a few people send me even like I had a really great one. It was a hardcover, and it had no identity attached to it, so I have no idea who sent it to me.
Oh, that's
About Parmenides,
mysterious.
by the way. Yeah, it was really
Yeah.
cool.
Um, but so I thought one thing I'd like to start with, kind of as a personal connection. Not long after you became a Christian, and I was following that conversation, I had a similarly kind of life-changing revelation, I guess you could say. And you played a part in this. Uh, just going through the things that come through the algorithm, and one maybe a concern as a parent. I had a few videos come up about like signs that you're probably not autistic, and I watched this video, and then I said, "Wait a minute, I'm not. This isn't going the right way." And regarding myself, and then kind of like went down that little rabbit hole a little bit, and took a couple of tests, and then it's like, well, okay, well, that's yeah, pretty. This explains a lot of stuff, but it was a weighty thing to wrestle with. And then there's one day, basically that became the obsession for a little while. And one day I'm watching all these videos and say, I need to take a break from this. What's Paul put out today? So I go over to Paul Vanderklay's channel, and he was having a conversation with you, and within the first minute or two, the conversation comes up of, are you on the spectrum? And you answered affirmatively. I'm like, okay, well, I guess this is like a God thing, and I can't escape it. So but the question that I wanted to ask you regarding that is because I'm thinking about how like my mind works and stuff, and a big part of like all the writing I've been doing has been to reflect over just all my past experiences. And then when I kind of got that piece of the puzzle, that was like another filter that added a lot more clarity to like, oh, now I understand what was going on in all these previous events. And I was wondering, because I think a lot of people kind of seemed surprised maybe at how much your coming to faith kind of clicked in a full way. And so I was thinking that it probably was a similar experience in some ways, that was just a piece of the puzzle that was missing. And so I was curious to hear you say about the process of like how that fit into all of your past kind of experiences and memories, and looking in backward over the events that brought you there, like the hand of fate, or of God.
Puzzles a very good metaphor, because the experience I had was while I was just to kind of maybe a little context. As I was entering into the deep contemplation of whether I was going to actually choose to follow Christ, to become a Christian, I had a series of things that I called the blockers. Things like, no, that doesn't seem right. The first had to do with the historicity. It was the crucifixion and resurrection actually an event that occurred? The second had to do with what's going on, like what's the actual meaning of the crucifixion and the resurrection. The third was the Trinity. And so I made my way through the first two blockers and was really spending time focusing on the Trinity. And the experience I had, and the key word here is experience, because it wasn't a thought, was very, very precisely one of all of the puzzle pieces. Like the last puzzle piece being dropped in, I actually saw the world or the cosmos as a dome. And the Trinity was a puzzle piece that went into the very top of the dome. And it had this really interesting sensibility, or again, an experience of no longer being puzzle pieces, but in fact being an actual whole. So,
Mm.
So the image that I've often described to people is, imagine you have a puzzle and you're putting the puzzle pieces together, but when you put the last puzzle piece in, it's no longer a puzzle. It's actually the thing. It's not even a picture of a thing. It's the thing that the puzzle was a picture of. Does that make sense? You got 2 steps.
Yeah.
And so the feeling of, and this is both true internally, so a integration into a well-ordered whole in myself, looking back and noticing all these aspects or elements or moments of the past going click, 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 click. Oh, now they all make sense. Now I understand what was happening at that particular moment in time and why it was happening, at least to enough of it a level to, how do you explain that? Like, there are certain things that you don't have to investigate them all the way down to the bottom to know that you could.
Yep.
It's like a whole bunch of things I inquire and go, oh yeah, I know I could get to the bottom of that if I wanted to. Skip. Like, wow, that's interesting. And then also externally, noticing that I no longer had a feeling of being in anything like a third person pseudo-objective position vis-a-vis reality, but rather being fully immersed in first person in reality. So kind of like an existential inverse Copernican revolution, if you'd like.
Okay. That's a good. Yeah, that that's it's interesting. So my kind of perspective, and this is what when I kind of was hearing your story, it was like I felt like we were traveling in opposite directions, because like maybe you could say, if that puzzle or whatever, like as a dome, like the dome of a cathedral, it's like I grew up in this cathedral, and I could see like very clearly the image at the center, and knew that was real. And then it was like, what is all propping this up? And that was kind of the kind of exploration that I've gone through.
So that would be very much the inverse. So
yeah.
For me, it was, here's everything in every direction going up, coming towards a unified center. But what's at that center? And then suddenly the center emerges, and then everything, and then it kind of descends back down, and everything integrates into a fully well-ordered whole.
So I feel like, I don't know, I'm like a little kind of anthropologist taking a survey of the Christian world or whatever, from this, from where I stand. So like, maybe just to give a little background of the context, like I grew up in. So both of my parents became Christians. My mom, I think, around high school. My dad around his first year of college. And and it was for my dad, it was like a pretty radical thing. Like there was drugs and demons and all sorts of stuff. And my mom, it was much more of she kind of had a more chaotic home life, and she found some solace in the church when she was a teen. But so my mom's family is pretty messy. The faith, whatever faith they had, was pretty nominal or non-existent. On my dad's side, all Catholic Italian family, and it was really interesting to see, because like there was a little bit of concern, maybe, I think, on my dad's part. I remember as a kid him wanting to make sure that he had certain like conversations with his parents to kind of make sure that they, he was concerned that they were understanding the substitutionary kind of nature of salvation from a more evangelical thing, but no pressure for them to like not be Catholic or anything like that. And so I grew up in this sense of like, my grandparents are good people, they were good people, and I think they had a faith and loved God, and it wasn't really an issue. And then if you go to like the comparison between my dad and his brothers, they all both remained Catholic. They were much more of like typical boomers. I think my grandparents' family is kind of a first generation, or born here, but wanting to be very, very patriotic. My grandfather was a vet, kind of Anglicanized. They say that. so it wasn't like a mafia movie or whatever, but but there was the food was, but everybody was kind of trying, striving for that upward mobility. And so like with my uncles, their kind of faith and Christian values maybe transformed more into that civil rights kind of energy, you could say. And I would say they were both very upstanding men. One has passed away. Good fathers, but the form that traditional faith took was a little bit different. And then when you go down another generation to like my cousins, they all went pretty far in academia or corporate world, and they're all like SJWs to the extreme. Some of them have all the stuff, all the extremes of that whole thing. And and so recognizing that growing up, so it's interesting because my parents had this thing of like they had an experience of coming into the faith from outside of this conversionary experience, but then they start having kids, and it's, well, we don't want how do you raise kids and like instill these values, and to see in the contrast, like, and obviously there's a great variety within Catholic churches and stuff, but like to just think that like the Catholic program was going to keep working in the broad sense, it did not. It did not work by the time you got to like the boomer generation. So it was that tension of like, well, maybe you have maybe like a more Baptistic view that like the kids all have to have like some salvation experience to make sure they're really in, or are they? And how do you raise kids in a faith if you really, if you kind of don't believe that you can pass it on, or do
nice.
So and I don't think they, I think they really more or less. I remember even, praying just with my parents when I was like 6 years old, and I'm like, yeah, this makes sense. And I could say, that was like, it never stopped making sense. I had many other experiences along the way that can maybe, that can certainly confirmed the reality of God and his presence in my life. But I wouldn't say necessarily like, oh, one of those later ones, like, there's a pretty crucial moment when I was like 12 maybe. And that was maybe, I think, a call to ministry. It's not that, I wouldn't say like that's when I entered into a relationship with God or whatever. Like I already was. So you do have these kind of different streams, the evangelistic, and maybe the faith that passes down through properly raising your children in the faith. And I think both of those are right, but it's not you don't usually find one church that's kind of having those things on the menu. It's usually either one or the other. So that's, that kind of started a lot of those kind of questions. And then beyond that, my dad became a pastor like out of necessity when I was like 10. The pastor retired and he kind of filled in for a while, but he ended up doing it for like 25 years. A very small church. And so and we were in New England. So it was more post-Christian than a lot of other parts of the country. Okay. And so you had an environment there where faithful churches would work together, even if they weren't all within the same denomination, or, there was more like fellowship on the essentials, I guess you could say, like, hey, well, so that exposed me early on to a lot of different types of believers. And, there's all these meetings where me and my friends, we would all go to like 4 different youth groups. And so we're in some church basement and we're just having these theological discussions about like, what if somebody does something horrible and, well, they're a Christian, but then they make a big mistake and then they get in a car crash, and like, where do they go? and just all these things. So it's like, so, so it's like all my life, this is the stuff I've been asking. And then I think, so yeah, so that was what my parents had my dad said it before, like his only my parents' only real goal was to try to raise us to make sure that we love Jesus, which then was kind of a difficult thing in the sense that there was no real push for us to like achieve anything career wise or like
yeah. I totally get that.
So like my brother, both my brother and my sister, I'm in the middle. They were a little bit resentful. I had my moments where I was a little bit, because they kind of just were drifting, not figuring out what they wanted to do. I kind of just made the jump, like, well, if the gospel is the most important thing, then obviously like the most important job is to be working in a church, in some capacity. So I kind of pursued that. And then I spent the last 20-ish years or so working in a variety of churches to different degrees, and seeing what worked and what didn't, and like there's so much good. Like I can look back at all the places I've ever been and see like, okay, these are all good people in all these places. They're all trying to do the right things. But there was a fairly short-sighted aspect as far as like what the purpose of the church was. It wasn't, I think it's very much been reduced to the Sunday morning experience. And I think, there's somewhat of a just maybe a cultural thing in that the freedom to worship is a protected right within our nation, and the church was reticent to lose that, so kind of has acquiesced on their levels of participation in anything other than that. That's kind of a trend I see. But then when you get out there and you realize like, oh, life's a mess. So my big like red pill moment would be when my wife and I had our first child, and that at that point I realized, like, even living almost entirely within the church, like how much of kind of general stuff had seeped in from the culture about like marriage and fatherhood and things like that, that there was a lot of those unspoken assumptions about like, marriage is kind of a drag, being a parent, it's going to cost, your freedom and all these things. And I never explicitly thought those things. I think the effect it had was it made me scared of the responsibility, which was good. I mean, it is something to be fearful of. But I felt like I have been lied to my whole life. Like no one was telling me that this was, like what this was. And it was really like, it was like an intense moment when it happened. So when my wife, like we're right about to go to bed, she goes upstairs, her water breaks. So we go to the hospital. She's in there for a long, long time. Nothing happens. Eventually, doctor comes in, sees the baby's heart rate is dropping, so she had to go for an emergency C-section. And then they handed me a baby, and I didn't know how she was doing. And an anesthesiologist came in and said some vague thing that was apparently positive, but I did not understand it. And I'm like, am I a single father now? Like, what is going on? I don't know. And so it was just a very radical experience, and so that that shifted our priorities and things, and maybe that a lot of the tension was that we were in a church community that was very tight knit, and they had done a lot of things, being in New England, to mitigate the cost of labor for getting people involved. So they the pastor's wife was a real estate agent. She would find these great deals. So the church owned like several houses where they could staff people who worked there. And then they had a school where they employed, my wife worked there full time. I had worked there for part time, and a couple of thrift stores. So they had people doing that stuff there. I ended up doing that full time in a more creative capacity. So I got to fix and make and design all sorts of stuff. So
nice.
that was pretty cool. And that was a really useful thing to learn. Essentially, that was the best part of it was what I got to do in that aspect of it, because when it was time for us to leave for a variety of reasons, the community was good. I wasn't necessarily the right fit. Part of it is this not knowing, like I'm undiagnosed on the spectrum. It made some of the connections within the community difficult to deal with. I didn't really have much of a support base. There was a lot expected of me performance wise, but not a lot of recourse. If I had problems, it's like, well, this might affect my work, or as in like I could lose my job. And our all of our friends, our church, both of our jobs, our housing are all tied into the same thing. So it's like, that's good if things are going good, but when it's not going good, it's not so great.
Right.
So I ended up moving to Texas because my parents were decided to retire down here. My brother had moved down here first, and then we came with my parents. And then I was like, I don't want to work at a church. We should still go to church. I will volunteer for a church. They didn't do a good job necessarily of mixing the business aspect and the spiritual. It was a little bit of a murky situation there, and some of it was like the church was run by a family, and so the pastor and his wife.
This is the New England church.
Yes, and all of his kids were involved, and so their kids and their kids' spouses were all involved, and in that sense, it was like, any sacrifice they're making for the church is a sacrifice they're making for their family. Whereas for anybody who is not part of the family, it was a little bit dicier of a situation. And so, yes, we moved down here, and I was like, I'll volunteer at a church, but I don't want to work for it. I don't want to mix all that. And then I ended up just doing cabinetry full time, and kind of went down all the conspiracy rabbit trails during the pandemic. Went deep into my Bible. A lot of the That Hideous Strength, was reading that, and kind of mapping things out, and kind of I don't know, God pulled me out of the despair, I guess you could say, and kind of really showed me that there was maybe the main concern that I was seeing within the Christian communities that I was involved with was it was very good in a lot of those places. Texas is pretty Bible belty and church centric, and if you're like in the evangelical bubble and you're going to evangelical schools and all these things, like, you're not seeing like how things really are. And there was a downplaying of maybe some of the seriousness of the threats, and I thought that was the wrong way to go. And there was a lot of people that left churches, because they would bring things up to their pastors, and the pastors would say, no, don't worry about that. When, from what I could see, like, the Bible is very clearly affirming that the seriousness of these dangers. It just also shows that God is not overcome by the seriousness of these things. And so it was like they squashed the resolution of the image instead of, bringing it to the full thing. But I don't know. I guess at a certain point, I was worried about my family. How am I going to support? I'm thinking like Christians are going to lose their jobs and all this stuff. There's going to be religious persecution at that moment. And essentially, I felt like God was saying, no, it's not. That's not going to happen right yet. But it doesn't mean that it won't necessarily happen in the future. And that maybe the time now, whatever it is, the church needs to prepare, I guess, to be getting ready for some kind of disaster, and I believe God always is going to save a remnant, but it's like if it's highly dependent on you and your choices if you're going to be part of that remnant or not. I had already been really focused on the issue of like discipleship and how we train leaders in the church. And so that was kind of the thing that I started to work on. So yeah, I had worked at a couple different churches where there was maybe like alternative ministry training programs to try to kind of fast track people. So I actually, that's where I got most of my training. Was like I did an internship at this big mega church, and it was not very useful to me, but I think I came in with a level of like competency and knowledge that was above normal for most of the people. And then I went to a Bible college and I learned some different things. So I've seen like, I keep like taking this survey of all the different things that are going on. And then I kind of saw what was happening like with Paul Vanderklay's circle that came up around that time. And then I was realizing like the church needs to get on board, like, because they're like, these are the people that are going to be coming in, and they need to have answers. The church needs to be prepared for them with answers. So, like, even when, we see like there is some interest among like the younger Gen Z guys in faith and stuff like that. And maybe a lot of them are going for the more traditional churches because they're wanting the stability and all that. But if at a certain point going to that church doesn't result in some sort of a career path, a path towards marriage, a path towards a meaningful involvement in that community, it's not really going to work, and not that I downplay the value of whatever is happening, because I think sometimes there is just that aspect of you have to like go and you have to obey. But I kind of got maybe just sitting around one day and realizing like my life is actually really good now, like spiritually, mentally, all this stuff. And it's because I'm like working with my hands, and that like makes the world make sense in a way. Mm-hmm. And so I sort of at that point connect like, okay, there's like a connection between all these different like layers of things. Like, you have to have like you wouldn't accept a postmodern approach to construction or whatever. Nope. So it's like, some things just work and some things don't work. And it doesn't mean you have to have everything figured out if you can get the gist of it. And so that even kind of made me like looking into the Gospels and thinking like, okay, Jesus was a carpenter. Like that was intentional in some point, like, because I take like, I'm almost like an ultra fundamentalist in this stuff of thinking like nothing is in there for nothing is in the Bible for no particular reason. Like, there's some significance to all of it. And, may not be obvious to everybody, or some people may not see it, but that was obviously a detail that stuck out to me. And then kind of started looking at all these other guys that he's pulling up, fishermen and tax collectors and a variety of different people with different skills, and then thinking about like the parables that he's preaching. And I realized like, okay, he's speaking a spiritual truth with these parables, but if he doesn't get the stuff about shepherding and farming and building right, then all the people that know about that stuff are going to be like, this guy doesn't know what the heck he's talking about.
Right.
So you have to have like a connection all through that. And and what I saw was like, okay, some of this is we've forgotten like the mundane half of the metaphor. We have all the commentaries that tell us what the parables mean, but there is something about knowing the sheep that made that parable speak way more deeply than to those people than it does to us. And I could see that in the sense of like, well, I know, like, because I know stuff about building now, and I know some stuff about other things. I know about music, and so the more kind of stuff you know about, like, in the real world, the more you actually can trust the Bible. That was actually, I think, maybe the first thing that got me excited with Jordan Peterson, is because he was saying, I really know psychology, and when I read the Bible, I'm like, man, this is just so real.
Mm-hmm.
And then like Louise Perry just the other day or whatever, she's saying like, I know, we've studied the sociology, we know what works and doesn't work, and the Bible affirms the sociology that we know that works. So in any sense, it's like if somebody's finding truth in some other way, the Bible is going to affirm it. And if it really doesn't,
we should be clear, it will affirm it and then plus some.
Yeah.
So everything you know, the deepest that you know, the things that you know deeply and the deepest that you know them will be mapped, and then there will be some, and that extra sum is moving towards a deeper, richer reality.
Yes.
And then you're left with this, well, crap, because the thing upon which I can really, if you kind of put me into a corner and said, what can you count on? The thing that I can count on the most is the thing that's telling me this knows better.
Yeah. And I mean, and I think at the most basic level is it's the people that believe it in the way they live. So, and this is even something where I came to like with like thinking about like my parent, like looking at all these other people who kind of had this experience of like walking away from an evangelical upbringing and be like, why did they walk away and I didn't? And I think what I noticed like with my parents is they were not perfect. And I think they probably felt bad. They kind of tried to like do some of the like, let's get the books and we're going to try to do the thing like in the perfect way. And they were like, well, we don't make enough money to have enough time to really do this. Like I was homeschooled from about 6th grade on, but it's like halfway through that, my mom was just working full time. So me and my siblings were just home alone, whatever. But what they did model was consistency in repentance, and so in 1 John where it talks about, if you say you have no sin, then you're a liar and God's not with you. But if you confess your sin, God is faithful and just and will forgive you of your sin. And he says that is walking in the light. And so that's what I saw with my parents. It's like, okay, they didn't do everything perfect, but every time they screwed up, and even times there's, sometimes where I said, you did this, and, there was one time where I confronted my dad about something and I was pretty scared. I didn't know how he would respond, and he owned it and he said, you're right, I've sinned and I'm wrong and please forgive me. And it's like, okay, well, that's the thing. If you do that consistently, then the people who follow you will trust you. And so that's how you get the thing in. But then going back to the evangelistic aspect. So now I would say, so I have three daughters. We have a son on the way in November. So
oh, nice. That's my geometry as well.
Yeah. So congratulations, by the way.
Yeah.
So I'm worried, like, okay, I'm not really worried about these girls, how they are going to be doing so much, but who the heck are they going to marry? And is it going to be, some guy that's gone through all the struggles and screw ups that I have or whatever? And I think my wife and I kind of figured this out in some sense, like, okay, we're gonna be in ministry, like we can't do the total isolationist thing. And this is also a part of what worked well for my parents, is that they very much made our family the priority, but they served others in the capacity that they could. So my dad was a pastor, but he was bivocational. But there was always people calling on the phone. There was Bible studies that were happening in our house, and a lot of the times it was like, we got to go help so and so, and he had 2 sons, and so we're going out and we're cleaning out somebody's garage or remote, cutting grass, whatever, painting houses. And I'm like, well, this is just part of life. It's like we those, we take care of these people, they take care of us. So my wife and I figured, like, okay, well, that's part of what we need to model with our kids. Like, we can't just be about the family, because we have this arc, if you will. We need to bring some other people in to like share what we have with them. And so that was clearly part of the message that I was picking up. But then it really extended towards especially this area of young men, which I was concerned about the young men before I became a parent. But like having 3 girls in a row is like really drove it home. I mean, because essentially that whatever happens with this mass of young men, that's what's going to determine the future. If they are jihadis or something better, hopefully.
Yeah, fill in the blank. There's lots of different there's a number of bad branches.
Yeah. And so essentially I just kind of got the plan, kind of thinking about like, okay, well, I like doing this stuff with my hands, and even like we had worked in youth ministry for a long time. And I remember there was like one time when I had to make some stuff, and I had one of the kids just come with me, and he was like, that was the best day ever. Like, just like we went to Home Depot, we bought some material, we made one of those giant Jengas out of 2x4s. And I was like, like, okay, it makes sense. So I'm like, yeah, guys need something to do. And so it's like, it's not that hard. It's just like that. But that was a part that the church normally doesn't think of as like a churchy activity, like the work aspect.
Nice.
I mean, the other part that got me thinking about that is that I, if not for the fact that I got some woodworking skills in my time in church ministry, when I decided I don't want to work for a church anymore, I would have been pretty screwed, because that was all the skill set that I formally pursued. So it's like, oh yeah, it's good to have a backup, kind of some of that stuff. And I saw that with my dad too, because he was a science teacher, and he was a handyman in the summers, and he had to fix a lot of stuff around the church, around our house, whatever. And so it's like, yeah, like having those people in there is really good. So I kind of wrote this book with not very well organized as such, but kind of as like a curriculum. But in some sense of it's all rough drafts, because it's like, I'm not an authority. This doesn't prove that I'm an expert, but it does prove that I've thought a lot about the stuff in here, and other people can do that too, And so it kind of is just this thing of like combining the real world experience with the Bible, seeing where they cross over in a whole variety of different areas of life, and then maybe trying to work out some kind of a basic plan for that.
Okay, can I branch here?
Yes.
So the first thing that I want to do is I want to focus on the notion of faith.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, I actually want to pose a conflict between ideology and faith. And so faith is not a kind of ideology. That's important. Yeah. Ideology and faith are distinct. They're different, and they're ultimately in conflict. And one of the primary challenges of our world is the collapsing of faith into a kind of ideology, and then the collapsing of life into an ideological life, in an effort to do everything by means of some kind of ideology, which then results in a struggle between ideologies to become the ideology that everybody's doing something by. Okay, so there's a whole sort of trajectory there. And you said, with which I completely agree, there is no postmodern
Construction.
construction. There's no postmodern kind of finishing carpenter. It doesn't happen. And now here's the point. If I go back and try to ground, what do we mean by faith? Faith has to do with a intimacy and a quality of real deep relationship with some aspect of life. So a shepherd has faith as a shepherd, right? And that means things like he understands he has a deep intimacy of embodied relationship with the field of being a shepherd, and therefore, by the way, can understand if you give a metaphor in the field of being a shepherd, doesn't understand it as a word or a series of words like an LLM does. He understands it as a real embodied experience, deeply immersed in the divine economy. Right. So now I'm going to add the divine economy to the toolkit. So I have faith and I have the divine economy. The divine economy, of course, is the work of God in the world. And the work of God in the world begins with things like physics. So what is it that holds the atoms together in the periodic table of the elements? So that's the divine economy coming up from the bottom, like mater being patterned in these nested patterns is the work of God in creation, the divine economy. And if I am engaging in the divine economy directly and subject to it, then I am cultivating a quality of faith that is real faith. A shepherd, a mechanic, a plumber, anybody who has to struggle with the created world directly on its terms, entirely on its terms, where success and failure is dictated by your ability to navigate the reality of that reality with increasing sophistication and subtlety and competence. Competence is a very nice word. And the point there is, I just want to go back, and that's faith. Right? So as you have cultivated skills, as you've moved from being somebody who doesn't know how to make furniture to somebody who's a master cabinet maker, you've moved deeper and deeper into faith. Right? And so then, of course, Christ can give you a parable, and that parable hits on two notes. One note is the content of the parable, but the second note is the faith that you have to have had in the domain of the subject or the context of the parable for the content to land properly. So then you're able to grasp the sense of what does it mean to have faith in Christ. Right? So that's taking the notion of faith in a particular domain, faith as a shepherd, faith as a cabinet maker, and saying, what does it look like if I take the notion of faith and expand it all the way to the fullness of the divine economy, and then in fact to the fullness of the triune God. So that's the thing, that's the ask, that's the movement, is can you begin to be seated more and more in heaven, and therefore in relationship with the whole of creation as the domain under which you have faith. And then ultimately, can you actually have faith in the biggest possible picture, capital F faith. And the reason why I want to do that is I want to then present that as the most basic, correct, foundational, effective, unimpeachable form of evangelism. And to evangelize properly is to cultivate faith in the other. And then in the process of cultivating lowercase faith in the other, just like Christ did with the parables, to bring them more and more able to enter into capital L faith. But you can't do it from the top down. Like if I just fire a bunch of phrases at you, a bunch of propositions, then what I'm doing is I'm trying to teach you an ideology. And as soon as scripture becomes an ideology, it's no longer scripture. Just another ideology. It's just another book on the shelf. It might as well be. And then, by the way, it's competing for things like how salient can it be? How much can I grab your attention? That kind of crap. So then I have to have smoke machines and flashing lights to try to grab your attention. But the most important point is once it's left being faith and it's become an ideology, the whole story is over. Like you're in the wrong world altogether. You're in the fallen world. You're in the domain of the prince of this world. So if you want to engage in evangelism properly, then you must engage in it in the fashion that you're articulating it.
Yeah.
And for boys and girls, but for boys more precisely in the case that we're speaking about.
Yeah. And then I'll be the apologist for smoke machines and lasers, is that they serve a really valuable role when you have them, and then you say to a teen guy, here, I'm going to teach you how to do this thing, and then this is your little part in doing the thing.
Well, if they're an expression of the divine economy, it's like, hey, I'm creating something that is actually somewhat interesting to you. But the real lesson is learning how to manage this piece of machinery, because the machinery is part of God, creation.
Yeah.
That's neat. Like, that's nice. Although it would be better to do it with sheep.
Like,
it would be better to teach the young man to be a shepherd than to teach him how to run a laser machine.
Right. Well, it's funny because so like out of the so yeah, so I had the weird path where I was able to kind of I learned a lot of the basic stuff from my dad. So that was my start with kind of carpentry and things like that. But I saw like there was more like there is more of that value in some of those things, like even like within the megachurch. Like I know a lot of people who have jobs doing web design and videography and things like that, and and they'll do like wedding videos and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, well, so it was a place to teach those skills, and like music was also a really great one because.
But masonry is better than web design.
I agree. It's yes, one is better. One is better to make money right now at this second, but but if so, and this is kind of my thing of like figuring out like, oh, well, yeah, it should be these things, because even if somebody figures out just some of this basic stuff, maybe they're not really great at it. It's like, well, what do you learn? There's a few things you can fix around your house when you own a home that you don't have to pay somebody else for. That's a win. And maybe you don't find a career working with your hands, but you are somebody who can do sales within a company of, because it's like, I'm not that guy. I need that guy to help me figure this stuff out.
Yeah.
So,
but let's rewind it back, because one of the key things we have to be mindful of is this notion of well integrated wholes.
Yeah.
The church cannot actually be anything at all if it's just a series of disconnected verticals. The church has to be. It is what I would call it in some cases the commons, or representing the whole as a whole, which is not a series of parts that are added together. And so, for example, imagine that you're dealing with boys somewhere around 10, certainly by 12. You have both the capacity and the necessity of beginning to cultivate these kinds of engagements in the divine economy. Notice that if I'm 10 and 12, I'm not worried about how you're going to make money. That's not the point.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, hey, it's time to learn how to be a plumber, because at 16 you're going to be the head of the household. You need to get the hell out of my house. No, the primary thing I'm doing here is this is the methodology of actually cultivating your ability to be in relationship with God. Like, this is much more valuable for you at that age to actually be working in masonry and then reading a parable than to be trying to memorize Jeremiah. I'm not kidding at all. Like, much more valuable, because you're getting it in the right order. Once you've got your hands and your body begin to understand what these things mean at a very, very deep level, because you live them in direct relationship, then the other things have a place to land, right? You're building you're building on a strong foundation up properly, as a mason would know, right? Just think about that as the silliest metaphor. A mason would know what it means to build with a strong foundation, what that means. Like, it actually means something. It's not just an interesting gesture. There's a whole lot that goes into what makes a foundation strong. What does it mean to build on top of it properly? What happens if you don't? And what are the choices that you have to think about? Oh, wait, if the foundation is not flat, then it's not strong, even if it's made of strong materials. Oh shit, I didn't think about that kind of stuff, right? So think 10 to 12, right? So now you're 6 years in, and you're 18 to 20. But you're 6 years in. Like, you've actually got exposure to, say, like 7 different trades. You've actually built meaningful competence in a diversity of different places. And more importantly, you've actually cultivated a real relationship with faith. So now your ability to have the lessons of Scripture land on a solid foundation, be integrated into that foundation well. Like, you are actually a house. You are a house. You have an interiority of plumbing. You have an interiority of walls and framing that has the ability. Now hold that. Now I'm going to move over here to the side, but these are not separate. What are the underlying cost elements associated with human life in the world that we live in today? Like, where do people spend money on? Right? So it's not complicated. With the singular exception of medical emergency, right, which is a spike, the stack is pretty simple. Housing is number one. Right? Your outflow of money is going to go into the paying for your house, whether you're renting it or on a mortgage, or even if you're just paying, maintenance and taxes. Still, number two is food. Right. Number three, education comes in as a big load. If you're paying some university to destroy your children, that becomes a big thing. But that would be a foolish idea in the first place, and we can solve that problem in a much better way. So if I take a look at the cost structure, right, I'm not trying to get you a job as a wedding photographer. What I want to do is I want to ameliorate the cost structure of being alive in the world such that you can live a wholesome, proper life. Like, I want to make it so that the wives can really, really actually homeschool, because the cost structure is such that they don't have a job. They don't have to have a job. They can choose to be that role if they want. I would recommend that they do as well. But the whole point is to create that possibility for real. And you're not going to get that by trying to figure out a way to help the husband have a slightly better job as a senior vice president of marketing at PaperCo. Because, by the way, the economy that we're in is actually in the process of utter collapse.
Yeah.
FYI, right? That's another piece. So if you run the math, let's say, for example, your church, in addition to having this program of teaching young men how to become young men, it also has a program of assembling people of, let's say, 2 years and more experience. So now you're 14 and above, into crews that periodically go out and build a house for the church. It turns out that if you do that over a period of 30 years, which is a long time, but it's not crazy to think about in that terms of a time frame, you can reduce the underlying outflows of the economics of a church. And here I'm talking about a reasonably moderate, like not even a mega church, like a 150 to 300 person church. You can have a third of the people in the church are living in homes that were built by the church. And by the way, you're now having an internal economy because you actually are building skills and capabilities of people who are participating in those crews, or they're actually now moving from apprentice to journeyman because they're actually building something that has to be integrated. And you're moving like, what was it? Something like you're taking the individual cost structure and reducing it by 2/3 of an individual. So instead of saying, hey, I'm going to move you from making $50,000 to $150,000, which is a lot. If that'd be like if somebody came to you and said, hey, Michael, I'm going to take your current salary, I'm going to multiply it by 3, you'd go, wow, that's incredible. I don't know what you just did, but I could use that room. I would say, well, the opposite is actually more stable, which is going to take you from needing $150,000 to actually needing 50 and living the same quality of life, actually a better quality of life. So if we think about the church as an integrated effort to take more responsibility for the wholeness of life and just literally programmatically knock out the most fundamental elements with maximum synergy. Every effort is not a single line of attack, but it's, hey, how does this particular effort have 16 synergies simultaneously? Then you'll notice that with just one generation or a generation and a half, you've completely changed the entire nature of how the material economy works in relationship to the divine economy. You've reestablished it properly. And okay, did you happen to watch my conversation with Gray and Annie about education?
Yes.
All right. So if you take it 2 levels up, it's become increasingly acceptable post Tom Holland to talk about the fact that liberalism sits on top of a foundation of Christendom, and that as the foundation of Christendom has become eroded, liberalism is finding itself standing on top of effectively nothing, and therefore not stable and collapsing.
Mm.
I want to say that more broadly, that, and I said this in that conversation with Annie and Gray, I think, the domain or the category, the realm that we would call the market and the realm that we would call the state, both are small circles sitting inside of a much larger circle called the church. And so it's not that the church should equip you to participate in the market. The church should establish the territory and hold the territory in which the market operates at all. And if it doesn't work that way, then you are only a couple of generations from catastrophe anyway. So it doesn't matter, right? It's just you get a few generations of driving fast cars and smoking cigarettes and drinking. I'm a GI generation to boomer, period. Before the end comes anyhow. So what does it look like for the church to properly take responsibility for the aspects of life for which it actually has proper responsibility, which includes a lot more than the Sunday morning service, as you pointed out? And then how does that that proper responsibility begin to radically change the individual's relationship with things like the market and the state, right? So that's over here in this category. So I've got things like maximum synergy. I've got things like, what does it mean to truly cultivate faith? As the primary missional work has to be cultivating faith from the inside out. And then what does it look like for the church to take proper responsibility for the larger whole for which it has proper responsibility? That's just the way it is. And so I don't think all of these hang together, and you have to think about all of them hanging together completely. Otherwise, every single line of effort you engage in fails because it's not bound together with all the collateral elements that it needs to have.
Yeah, well, that's why I wrote. I find like I have to write between 10 and 30,000 words on a given subject to feel like I've got a grasp on it. Nice. And there's, it's interesting because there's been let me see. Okay, I don't know if you. Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar. Have you read anything by Francis Schaeffer?
Shockingly enough, yes.
Okay. So, I mean, he was pretty, probably, one of the more influential thinkers in my head since I was a teenager, and then kind of rediscovered his stuff in the pandemic. And of course, he had like the things that he did in books, but then he also had a community that did embody all this stuff, which is an important part of it, but so he's connected to this kind of reformational worldview that says like everything is, connected to this divine economy and any aspect of life. There is a significance worth exploring. But in reality, most of the people that have really gotten excited about this message are just church people that are most excited about church stuff. So it hasn't been like, it hasn't.
Well, this is a timing issue.
Yeah.
I mean, if you tried to convince people to go to the moon in 1776, you would get like one person who's excited, and everybody else is like, I don't know what you're talking about. Right? This is a timing issue. So he wrote his stuff in a time frame where the post-war institutional order and the post-war narrative was very solid, like very vital. He was seeing the fact that once you have moved from the truth, capital T, into a narrative that is a ideology, the post-war narrative, a secular narrative, let's put it that way. Once you move from the truth into a secular narrative, the end is nigh. But it didn't matter because, as you say, there's only a small number of people were prepared to see that at that time. But we live now at the collapse of the post-war narrative. The post-war, the secular narrative, which will inevitably collapse, is collapsing. The post-war institutional order is collapsing. And so the many people, most people ultimately are by necessity being forced to recognize the collapsing of the post-war narrative, and therefore forced to look around and go, well, how then shall we live? It's the question is now a real question.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I think the thing that I see, like, and this is what I would want more churches to maybe think of, is I see we're kind of living in the moment where that parable of the shrewd manager, like that's the moment where we're living in, where it's like there is a lot of infrastructure right now, and like money still is worth something right now, and it would be good for the church to convert as much of those opportunities into the more like stable, actually productive things of houses and farms and long educational institutions and things like that.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I say yes as the Church of the Commons. I kind of maybe think more in the kingdom in that way.
That's a better way of putting it. I mean, I use the word the commons because I'm speaking now kind of like a regenerated secular language, but the kingdom is much more proper.
Yes. And I'm going to say, well, okay. Because what I had thought is, even in the concept of this, is like maybe thinking of it as like a parachurch organization, or my thought is that everything should be decentralized. So like I want people to take these ideas and implement them, and you could do it. And I said basically like three different ways you could do it, more or less. with a possible fourth, like like would be the on the easiest level. It's just like make this the thing that your church does on Saturdays. Get the guys that are in your church that already know how to do something, whether it's just simple home maintenance, raking leaves, mowing lawns, whatever, and put them with a young guy.
Yep.
That the men in most churches probably feel undervalued. They are undervalued, and they would probably appreciate the opportunity. Then the next level would be anybody that owns a business who is a Christian. For them to take it on as a business, I think would be the best way, because then you're free from a lot of the, like, you know, in this current moment, free from a lot of the other restrictions. So if you can actually like, and then a church can help them, because maybe they can't take they can't pay a apprentice full time. They can pay him part time. Maybe you have somebody in the church that can give them a place to stay, and then maybe if you have a few people, you can get you get your churches in your area connected. Which churches have businesses? Which churches have students that need a career to pursue?
Mm-hmm.
And then you get that they meet there in what's happening in the day-to-day life of work.
Yeah, well, let's like even let's take it up one notch. So decentralized. One thing that I would propose that's critical in terms of decentralization is, and we have this, right? We have this in Scripture. Remember, this is the way I'll tell the story. So I have, since I'm half Jewish, I take some liberties with the way that I tell the story. You know, the apostles are going out there. We're in Acts, or early Acts, and they're like, "Man, this is a lot of work. This is really a lot of work." And people are coming to him saying, "Hey, the widows are not being taken care of. You guys, Thomas, you got to take care of the widows." I was like, "You're right. We got to take care of the widows, but I'm busy. Like, I'm really busy. I got to do this primary mission of actually spreading the word. And I don't know how long this miracle thing's going to last. I got to really get it out there. And by the way, I got to go down to wherever he went. Let's say India. So we're going to create deacons. Deacons, you guys have this new, we're going to decentralize this thing. You now have a responsibility for these kinds of things that are different than the responsibility that we're taking. But it's part of the larger whole, right? So the point is that I'm saying all this because say, hey, pastors, you can't run the entire body of the church through you. The church that I'm describing, a church that takes responsibility, for example, among other things, of the divine economy, is not a church that can be run entirely through the pastor or the priest. It just can't happen. You have to have deacons, and those deacons have to be able to handle a larger body. Okay, so now 2, we're sitting on a ton of real estate. In fact, we're sitting on a ton of real estate that's in the process of being turned into like shopping malls and condos and shit like that, which is absolutely terrible. I mean, the fact that you've got 2 generations, 3 generations, 4 generations back, people worshipped at this church, and now you just the best you can do is turn it into $300,000 and make it into a condo is really dishonorable. And for the most part, even if this real estate is being used, it's only being used a tiny fraction of the time. All right. So what if we did something like this? What if we made a church version of WeWork, which is to say, what would it look like to take Monday through Friday, a co-working facility that had this vocational sensibility and had an interior missional characteristic? Take the false idolization of being a missionary. I just said a lot right there, but the false idolization of being a missionary, and by the way, archetypally being a missionary in Africa, and said, no, we're going to take that same false idolization, but we're going to turn it back and say, to be a proper missionary, you need to give some of your expertise, your capacity into this WeWork facility so that people can come and get training. And inside this environment, we're actually going to be doing a lot of stuff that you're talking about. We're going to say, hey, here's a bunch of work. We actually have a whole long list of work. And a fraction of that work is a big fraction, maybe initially, is actually just work that is needed by the church. There's an old lady who needs something built at her house. There's work that needs to be done. And then you can expand out and say, hey, but we're actually going to start creating businesses out of this. If you currently have a landscaping business, you're going to come here, you're going to apprentice, and you're also going to take kids out of this who have reached a certain level of competence and actually put them to work. If you've got a what do you call it? Power washing business, fill in the blank, right? So you're blending both the training and apprenticeship and missional work together. And since it's the WeWork sensibility, we're going to layer Y Combinator on top of that and say, if, by the way, from the point of view of the church, you've reached a level of competence that you can actually help people create functional businesses or mentor people who are running businesses, or add this extra layer of functionality on top of it. Like you mentioned, if you had a marketing guy that would help you, well, that should be available too. So it's like, hey, Michael is coming in not as somebody who needs to learn how to be a cabinet maker. He's got that figured out. In fact, he's already part of his missionary work, gifting that back into the church community by teaching a handful of young men how to do it and having them participate in his workshop in a guild sensibility. The gift that he's receiving now is he's actually getting sort of a fractional CFO and a fractional CMO that are spending time with him, actually possibly hands-on, not just throwing good ideas at him, but helping build out the marketing capability. And all of this is in the larger context of the divine economy, which is Monday through Friday at the church building, putting that real estate back into full use. For example, that's a whole story. FYI, if you've got a big enough church building, you should also be doing a homeschool co-op in that environment. And it should be happening in the same space so the kids can see, like the younger kids can see what's going on. Like what does it look like to become a 10, 12, 14-year-old? Oh, this is part of the story. You're seeing, your father and your uncles and cousins doing things that are of the same ilk. So you're beginning to absorb it just by being present to it while you're working on, the younger version. And of course, as you get older, as you become 10 or 12, as I'm a boy right now, obviously in the story, I noticed that the homeschool blends directly into this environment. It gets handed off, and more and more of what I'm doing in the category of education is just this, right? Because mostly that's what it's supposed to be anyhow. Sorry, that was a lot, but you get the idea, right? Now you're starting to see how all these pieces begin to fit together.
Yep. Yeah. So that was to say, my level 1 was like a volunteer thing. Level 2 is a small, run by the small business. My third level was to say like kind of a trade school, but I've always kind of imagined it more as like, one of these camp retreat kind of spaces, multi-function, but it would be the place people go.
I like that vision feels very right. Like, is the problem with it? Well, okay, we'll get back to another thing in a second.
And then the potential level 4 is that if you have the right combination of businesses, and this say like maybe now something that's more online, and then a bunch of people that know how to do trades, it's like go take over these dying little towns. So
yeah. So instead of doing a church plant, you do a church plant, right?
Yeah.
Instead of saying all we're going to do is send 12 people who are going to try to convince people to come, worship on Sunday morning with us. Like, no, we're actually going to be bringing a fully functioning seed, right? We will be bringing the faith of a mustard seed. Do you get what I'm saying when I say that? I was just, talking to my wife about it. It's like, we heard a pastor talk about that and saying the faith of a mustard seed, meaning nothing, very small.
Yes.
Mustard seed small. I'm like, no, that's exactly upside down.
There's a section in my book on that.
The faith of a mustard seed is complete. Mustard seed has 100% faith in mustard seedness.
Right.
And therefore has the capacity to fully commit to listening to participating in the context that God has created around it to unfold the essence that God has put in it. That's what the faith of a mustard seed is. And if you have the faith of a mustard seed, then even though you objectively look very small, you will produce a giant tree. So that's the parable.
Well, yeah, but then I would say, but some of this is, and this is kind of like maybe, my not knowing I was autistic and being in a church, not my dad's church, but the church I worked in for a long time that was very like fear-based not very, but a little bit of the fear-based evangelism thing. And that, maybe sometimes it's good to send the faith of a coconut.
What does that mean? Give me what's that?
You have because the coconut is a seed that has a lot of resources in it. So it has a better chance of dealing with unforeseen circumstances. And so that is kind of even the thing to say, like, yes, like, because there is an aspect of that, not say blind faith, but the people that are willing to do like God uses that all the time, but it's kind of like you're supposed to grow a little bit mature beyond that. I mean, and then you get to a certain point where you trust God, and if He tells you to do something crazy, you're fine with it because you know Him. But it's a both and.
Well, so here I want to get back to the notion of vocational school. I have to say it that way because trade school is already denatured. Vocational school is a great example of this problem of the rectification of names. Growing up, I understood the word vocational school to be basically synonymous with trade school and kind of basically synonymous with having lost. Like, hey, you didn't go to college, you went to trade school, which kind of means you're a loser. That's kind of like the essence of the takeaway. And how do I know? Well, I know because trade schools are advertised at like 11:30 on TV to people who don't have a job, like something like that. Like the whole aesthetic is there. But the key thing is this. The key thing is it completely involves the denaturing of the idea of vocation. And what is vocation? Vocation is what is God calling you to do.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with necessarily what you want to do or even what you're good at. It's what God calls you to do. And so part of the process of going to vocational school is learning how to get really good at that. So what you're putting there is if you have come into relationship with him, if you've reached a point where you can actually trust him, then you can begin to operate on the basis of that trust, which is say faith in him. But if we do things right, by the time you're 8, you're beginning to enter into vocational school, the school of learning how to trust him. Yes, that's the point. I'm learning how to be a shepherd. I'm learning how to be a mason. I'm learning how to be a carpenter so that most fundamentally, so that I can learn how to trust him. So by the time it matters, by the time I'm 16, 18, 20, I'm actually really good at trusting him. I've actually, and what's beautiful is because I haven't gone down this terrible distraction called ideology, where I've learned to trust ideology and put all of my capacity for making sense of reality and making choices into an ideological way of thinking and being. I've actually spent that entire time frame, that most important developmental time frame of the 7 to 14 time frame of learning how to trust him practically, again, not real ideology, not ideology, capital ideology, and not faith as ideology, but actually faith. When I actually am exiting into taking responsibility, I have gone to vocational school. And so I can trust him. And so now taking something that happens maybe once out of 1,000 and only for people who have lived, 50 years. No, it's actually pretty commonplace for a 20-year-old to have enough of this to be able to go into life in that way. I would say, by the way, that's the most important part. That's the through line. Like that's the thing around it, which everything else ultimately balances. Because if you're trying to navigate life on the basis of your own understanding, it's not going to work. Yeah. And the answer is not to get better at understanding.
Well, that's pretty much the end of our time there. So
nice. All right. Well,
thank you.
Yeah.
Look forward to seeing you in person in a couple of weeks. So.
Oh yeah, cool. That'll be fun. See you there.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Now you have to hit